Jerry.
Fantastic. Hello, world. How are you? How are you, Dr. Rob? So I wanted to. I was very curious. I wanted to reach out and learn a little bit more about your breakthrough and sort of what your long-term process was in terms of what you were going through and how you process it. Was it just one manifestation vet form over another, or was it? Did they evolve over time?
So, in the assignment for week 4 of the Ascension experience, which is this one is the 8th course, which is relationships with children. And I almost, like Jessica, since I never got around to having kids, I thought, no, do I really want to do this? And the first 2 weeks were indeed about your relationship with your children, but then lo and behold, week 3 turns out to be about your inner child, and it was extraordinary. And it's a new concept that we hadn't heard. Well, inner child's not a new concept, but it's a new concept in terms of the Joshua teachings that we haven't actually talked about that in that community, or Joshua's never talked about that before that I'm aware of. And then lo and behold, week 4 comes up with this thing called integration, which is completely mind-blowing. And then there was this exercise that we did whereby you had to describe the most satisfying relationship in your life and the one that gives you the most joy. So that was all good. So I did that, but then you had to describe the most unsatisfying relationship, which relationship gives you the most discomfort. So I started working on something there, and I wrote down some things about a person, and then I thought, actually, this other person, that relationship's even more problematic for me. So I jumped from person A to person B, and I started doing exercise on person B. And then Joshua says in the plot, the homework, the next day, when you've done that, send it to Gary. So I happened to be awake. It was 4 or 5 in the morning, and so I made it into a PDF, the scribble. I don't know if you can see it. It's a legible scribble, and then so I sent it to him, and then he came back and he said something about you've got a. Let's see if I can find it. Actually, it was pretty cool, interesting what he said, because they also said that we will give you another plot, right? So.
Actually, I think he said we'll give you something else.
Something else, yeah.
Right.
So,
it was interesting. So I was like, "Whoa, okay, that doesn't mean he's going to give us a plot, right?"
Yes. Anyway, so I'm just trying to find what he actually said. Oh, he said, in regard to this person, the first one, there is a flawed premise about yourself that is showing up in this relationship. The universe is trying to eliminate the flaw that is stuck in your mental construct. You are in resistance to how that person is being due to the flaw in your mental construct. Without this flaw, you could not see any aspect of that person as wrong. And then the plot that he gave me was identify the aspect of you that needs to be seen differently by others. If inspired, send it to me when done. So, which kind of sounded like a riddle, to be honest, when they sent that. So anyway, so I was talking to Jessica and we started discussing all this stuff. And so I'd done some work on it. So we ended up talking some more about it. And as you know, Jessica is brilliant at the limiting belief identification process and decommissioning them, you might say, or reducing their intensity so that they don't control your life in the same way that they used to. And so we did some work on that, and it was quite amazing. So we ended up with we talked about various things that happens with several people, 3 people in particular, maybe a 4th one, at the time where I felt betrayed by those people in my life. And so the upper limiting belief, she called it, like the higher level, easier to get to one, about betrayal. Because if you say your fundamental limiting belief is I'm not worthy, then she said that's a very hard thing to disprove, because how do you prove you're worthy? Like, it's an easier one would be I was betrayed, or I'm not deserving of a beautiful, wonderful wife, or something like that, So those are far easier to process, those kinds of upper level beliefs, limiting beliefs, than the more core ones. So she said, that's an upper level limiting belief about betrayal. And you could see how you can work that through and say, well, that's just how I took a perspective on that at the time, but it's not really how it was. But then what we discovered when we got right down into it was that a limiting belief I have is that I have to be very, very good in order to be loved and valued. And I realized that from about age 2 and 3 onwards, I remember a particular incident when I was 2. And it's all about that if I was what my mother called a good boy, her definition of a good boy, then I felt the warm glow of my mother's love and approval. But if I was my actual self, who was a sometimes naughty boy, then I was an outsider and I didn't feel any of that warm glow of my mother's love, affection, and approval. So, and that was the way it was throughout my childhood. I'm not blaming my mother for any of that, because parents use all sorts of ways to, get the behavior they want from children. And so anyway, I spent the next 60 years doing that. 60 years doing that in every aspect of my freaking life. I do it in my work, I do it everywhere. Like, I was at somebody's place and I was doing something with their water feature or something, and I had this thought, if so-and-so, I was doing that for them, they'd be very pleased. Like, aren't I a good boy? And I think this is just ridiculous. I can't believe I'm doing this, at 60, what am I, 64 years old now. So more than 60 years, 62 years of this stuff. Because I actually had this vivid memory. I live in New Zealand, for anybody listening or watching, and my grandmother from Australia was over visiting, staying with us in 1960. So I was 2 years old, and I've been to the bathroom. And when I came out, my grandmother said, and my mother was there too, something like, "Oh, did you wash your hands?" And before I could say anything, my mother said something like, "Oh, yes, he's a very good boy like that." And I remember thinking, yes, I'm a very good boy, and thinking, that feels good. That feels really good. And so that was that's actually my first memory that I'm consciously aware of. And isn't it interesting? Now I know why I have that memory. It's been imprinted all these years, and I've told that story to people, but I hadn't ever realized the profundity of this lifelong pattern. And it's, we've been doing all this limiting belief work, and a lot of people do it. And you identify limiting beliefs and you work through them. And I've shifted barrow loads of, shovel loads. I've shoveled that stuff. It's like shoveling the snow off your driveway or something, man. I've shoveled truckloads of that stuff. And then, there's still something niggling there. There's still a few wrinkles, a few bumps in my vibration. And what are those, and how to identify them, and how do I move those things along? How do I process them? And suddenly you get this blinding insight that, oh, this thing's been directing my behavior my entire life. So, and it also has to do with, it plays out in 101 ways. I won't go into all of it, but it's the most extraordinary thing. So anyway, that was a massive shift for me, that I suddenly had this bump. And then in the answer to the question of when Gary said, identify the aspect of you, that means me, that needs to be seen differently by others, then I thought, how the hell do you answer a question like that? So I said, I have believed that I need to be very, very good to be loved and valued by others. And I often go over the top in doing this. In doing this, I am being inauthentic and being good in order to feel liked, loved, and respected. So that was a really interesting insight, that I'm being inauthentic because I'm not really being me. I'm being a good boy version of me. I would rather just be me, so bug flying around, as I truly am, to act with love and let people make of me what they will. They don't know me, and their view of me is as much about their own beliefs as anything else. The good boy approach started when I was 2 years old, when I realized that I only basked in the warm glow of my mother's approval and love when I was a good boy. So I hid the version of me that was my true self. That boy was unlovable and seen as naughty. I concluded that I had to keep my true self and real nature private, and I had to pretend to be someone who I am not. This has persisted for over 60 years, until yesterday, when I realized that it pervades all aspects of my life, including my work. Now I want to be my authentic self, to act with love and expect nothing in return. I want to let source energy and source love flow through me unimpeded. So
I love it. That's awesome. That's really, really powerful. And I think it's interesting too, the way that you and Jessica got to that limiting belief, because I think all of us, when you start, giving examples out, like people will say, well, I'm unworthy, I'm not valuable. So you go with the big one because it's the easiest, right? But what you did was you dug down a little deeper and you're like, okay, well, what does this actually mean? And that's the part that we have to do, right? We have to dig down a little deeper and really try to figure it out. And I think the way you and Jessica got down to, I have to be a good boy to be loved, that is, I mean, that's awesome. That to me is like,
yeah,
that's how you
that's a very
get,
good point
that's how
you
you
make,
get to
because
the
you
inner
could
self.
say it's an exploration of unworthiness, because it's an element of being unworthy, is that the person who I truly am is not likable or lovable or whatever, or valuable or whatever it might be. So you could just say, well, that's unworthiness, and then, like Jessica said to me, oh, that's a very hard thing to disprove. Like, let's get a lot more specific. Let's pick an element of that unworthiness that you could disprove.
Well, it's almost like, let's get more personal, right? Because the
Yep.
unworthiness is like an umbrella, right? I could say that, you could say that, we don't have to describe it. But when you say I have to be a good boy to be loved, someone will say, well, what makes you think that? And then you have that great experience, that great memory, right? That was imprinted, you talk about. That's going to help me, because I tend to go to the top and just be like, oh, it's, it's worthiness, but that's not enough, right? Because yeah, it's part of it, but if you got to dig a little deeper, and then you got to go to a personal thought or memory or example in your mind, and then take out that specific element, and then you can build on that. And because that's, I think for me, even when Jessica has given me some ideas, like, it's been so top line for me, when I go to disprove them, it's not real. It's easier
Yeah.
just to disprove a limiting belief with a memory.
So
It's,
with you, I know you've talked about education and dyslexia and school, and that you really had in your mind that the pinnacle of worthiness in that domain would be an Ivy League education. And so you fixated on that. So that's a good example of the same thing, where you could say, I feel unworthy. How do I disprove that? Well, I can't really, but you can actually talk about intelligence, and you can talk about education and what they are worth. And then how interesting that in the same week as this integration thing, which we might get to talk about today, there was these five daily emails about intelligence, right? Which is why
they were the quotes. They were the quotes from the daily spiritual world.
Yes.
Insane.
Yeah.
Insane.
So, I mean, it's worth reading, because this is radical information, about what actually is intelligence. And so I was having a discussion about a business matter with a colleague last night on WhatsApp, and I made some comment about intelligence and wisdom, and I kind of blurred the line a bit on purpose, because in the Joshua context, it's a different take. And this woman is highly intelligent. She's really, really brilliant. And she said something like, and so her example of what the difference is, and then I'll talk about the Joshua thing. She said, when I was 17, anyway, I'll paraphrase. When I was 17, my maths teacher took me aside and she said, no, she said, intelligence and wisdom are not the same thing. You, my dear, are very intelligent. So that's what her maths teacher said at 17. And then this woman's, probably, I don't know, she might be 50, I'd guess. And and then she said, and I hope I've gained some wisdom since.
I love it. That's really, really powerful. The educational aspect for me, because the system, right? So if you look at in any societal outside conditions, right, there is a school system and there is a measurement guide that if you meet those measurements and you meet those standards, you get rewarded with whatever. Magna cum laude, you graduate, you get on, then you get to go to high school, get to go to college, you get to go to, whatever, get your master's. So if you don't fit within that very specific list of requirements, then you're told, wow, you're not this thing,
Yes.
right? Let's just say smart for element, but that you're not intelligent or you're not smart has nothing to do with the educational system. They're two completely separate things. And it took me until this course and Joshua to realize they were two completely separate things. Like I thought one was dependent upon the other. And then even compound it even more, I thought that your vocation, the job you picked, was then piled on top of that system. So you had your intelligence was based upon how well you did within the system. And then that gave you a job, and that gave you security, and that gave you your financial limitations. I thought it was all I thought it was all one big vertical system, because that's the way they teach it to you, right? That's the way they bring it up. And now to realize that it's all one linear, these are all just elements within a timeline, and that the intelligence, everything is already out there. And depending on where you are, you can get anything you want just by thinking about it, asking the right kind of questions. Every bit of intelligence is out there for you to have when you want it.
Yeah. So I mean, it's a radical notion when you reframe the whole thing, and also you realize that in a way that if you swallow that entire idea of you're a parent, or let's say you're a young adult and your parents have always wanted you to go to law school or whatever it is. We'll use law school. And so you never question the idea of going to law school. Like I never questioned the idea that I'd go to university. It was just a given in my family. And so you do well at school and you get all the grades you need, and then you get into law school and hopefully you get into a prestigious one, because then your career path is more guaranteed or likely to be good. And then you study this stuff, which, a lot of it, I mean, law, some people find interesting, but I know a lot of people who studied accounting and commerce, it was boring as anything. They did it because it was what we called a meal ticket. Whereas I did art stuff that interested me, which was pretty radical and seeming, oops, sorry about that. Something flicked on my screen. I thought I'd lost you, which was seemingly irresponsible of me to do that when I had friends who were doing serious proper degrees like accounting and law and science and stuff like that. So anyway, and then you get a job in a law firm, and then you realize that it's not the romantic thing like some TV show about lawyers. It's actually hard work, hard graft, and you work ridiculous hours. And, I think about lawyer friends of mine, and I would say that all of them don't like their jobs at all, but they're stuck on that hamster wheel. They're stuck with their monthly income, right, that they need to support their lifestyle, to support their image of themselves, right? And the idea that they could, grow their hair long and wear a t-shirt all the time and, wear a thingy majig around their neck if they wanted to, and just, like you can in my sort of work, the idea that they could do any of that is, I guess some lawyers, who work for themselves might do that, but not in the corporate world. So what I'm saying is they get stuck in this thing. And if you actually boil it all down, well, what is it? It's about fear and worthiness. And it's that, what would people think of me if I threw it all away? Oh my God, that would just be my parents and everybody I know, that would just be shameful. Like, I can't throw it away. And all, besides, so in other words, you get stuck with this level of house, this level of car, this level of vacation, and in the entire thing. But when you're 95 and you're on your deathbed, you may have a different view on all of that and thinking, did I waste 50 years of my life?
Yeah, it's funny because leading up to, let's just say, a post-high school experience, in the world, leading up to a high school experience is and all the way through high school and into college is the most unique experience on the planet. It's college, and it's into college, into university, and post, where everything changes. Because when you're in middle school or in high school, whatever that may be, you're not really given a lot of choices, right, in terms of what courses you can take. And so you're in a system, and you like things and you don't like things, and you're able to talk about it. You don't really care. Then you go into college, and you're supposed to, at 18 years old, know what you want to do for the rest of your life, and then take courses that are specific for that vocation, right? I can remember, I'm like, I would just ask this. I would ask the question. I would go down on all my friends. Hey, what was the easiest class you took? What was the easiest? I mean, literally, that's how I filled my course at class every single semester. I didn't care. I'm like, none of this stuff makes sense to me. I don't like any of it. I wasn't going to become a doctor. I wasn't going to become a lawyer. I didn't care about any of those things. And I would literally go through my courses and I would talk to all my friends and say, well, give me a course you got an A in. And I'm like, and I just knew that if they got an A, I could get an A. I took courses. I had no idea what I was taking. I took philosophy, or, a number of times. I took pre-law. I took chemistry. I took biology. I'm like, get any course that somebody got an A in that I was friends with. I'm like, I can get an A. Cool. But it was so weird. You said that, when you said that, you're like, hey, it's not like when I look back now and I'm like, okay, what was my thinking? I just wanted to get out. I just wanted to be done with it. Like I didn't fit within this intelligent measuring system. And I rebelled against it everywhere I could by taking easy courses and doing stuff. I mean, I remember getting on the president's list in college, and I remember my parents going, what did you do? How did you get on that? It wasn't like, congratulations. It was, how did you do? And I remember them telling them, my roommate at the time was brilliant and a great, great guy. And I remember telling them, I just took every course that Glenn took. And like what? I'm like, and I just read his notes. He was the best note taker on the entire planet. I mean, there's nobody that takes better notes. Even today, when I look at anything in life, I look at the practical use of it. People want to look at Bitcoin and go, how does it work? And I'm like, I don't really care how it works. It makes sense to me. I want to know how it's going to be used. Yeah. Any crypto that I invested in, people say, but don't you want to know how it works? And I'm like, dude, do you understand how the digital fiat currency in America works? Like, I doubt it. Like, you could talk about it. People could say they don't really know any of it, but I'm like, I understand I understand my roommate took the greatest. Now I'm like, with the greatest notes, I passed any test on the planet. And I literally would go step by step. That's how I went through the educational system, right? And then when I read that for Joshua this week, right, when ending out there, there was a legal contract I was reading for work, and I was going to send it to the lawyer, and I'm like, no, like, this is all wrong. And I'm like, we need an appendix and we need an exhibit A, and then that's going to solve all the problems. And I created these things. I said, I'm just going to do it. Forget about it. Did it in like 10 minutes, sent it. And they were like, oh, you had the lawyer do this? I'm like, and I just was like, no, I just put it together, guys. They were like, oh, wow. Okay. And I was like, I'm done with, like, I can do this. This is easy. Like, what, like, don't overthink this stuff. But for so many years, I was told, you're not a doctor, you didn't play one on TV, so you can't take that, and all those things. And so just recently I've started to go, I can do this. Like, I'm just going to do it. If you want to send it to a lawyer afterwards, go right ahead. But here's what we should be doing. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's a lot of it. There are specialties. There's no question in terms of accounting, lawyer, those types, to your point, those types are proper, right? As we were growing up, jobs. But overall, anything else, you could figure it out. Yeah. So you wouldn't try brain surgery then, probably? Lawyer, one thing, maybe not brain surgery. No, well, you know what? If it was presented to me and somebody was going to ask me a question and it was important to me, I would have no problem reading up on it and try to understand what they were doing. Would I attempt to do that? No, I don't like to. That's not me. But I mean, anything to do. Look how many people become experts in cancer because their kid gets cancer. Look how many people, right? Because the minute if you look at what Joshua says, the minute you become passionate. Yeah, I'm going to read those quotes. Something. And they're really, read those. Good. Yeah, read those quotes because that's the difference. Yeah, I mean, that's true. I learned a lot about dementia, like Alzheimer's people know about, which is the most common form of dementia, because my wife who passed away had a thing called frontotemporal dementia, which is a pretty nasty form of dementia. But so I know a lot about dementia now. And, there's over 100 kinds, and Alzheimer's is the most common, and vascular dementia, which is kind of like heart disease of the brain, the blood vessels, like that's the second most common. So, people don't actually understand any of that basic stuff until they have the horrendous experience, with a parent or something. Anyway, so I learned an awful lot about dementia when I knew zero about that stuff. I just want to tell you a funny story. Trace, my partner, used to work for a university, and she worked with a guy, and they raised money from donors, and they created a lot of research chairs and professorships and all sorts of interesting things. And there were some very interesting science projects they were working on. And so there was a dinner one night, and I think the couple were the donor, and there was some of the scientists who were physicists were there,
And the woman, without thinking, the donor woman said something like, well, it's not exactly rocket science, is it? And the guy sitting there was a friggin' rocket scientist. And he was like, well, actually, it is. It is rocket science. Anyway.
I love that. I love
Yeah.
that. But and on a flip side, think about this too. On a flip side, how many times do you meet people? I mean, there was a janitor at my kid's school that came over from India that was an aerospace engineer in India, but here was a right. I mean, you're like, what?
Oh yeah.
So when you talk about intelligence, what you just said was beautiful. That there are these systems that we just, but in life in general, there aren't. It's all available to all of us.
Yeah. Well, before I read the stuff that I'm about to read now, this week, when I would have told you that story about the woman, the donor, I would have said something like, she wasn't that bright, not that clever, not that intelligent. But what I said this time was, she said this without thinking, because I now have a different concept, well, the beginning of a different concept around intelligence. So day 24 says, you assume that humans are born with varying degrees of intelligence. This is a misconception. You all have access to infinite intelligence. You have now the ability to access all the intelligence in the universe. For one reason or another, you allow only a limited amount of intelligence to flow to you. So I thought that was very interesting, because that's about resistance and flow. And
that's about limiting beliefs too, right?
Yes.
I mean, that's my limiting beliefs were that I could not access that information. I was not worthy enough to have that information.
Yeah.
And then after reading that, and then I listened to the Joshua live call from Friday, which I think is going to be a lot. Joshua like 358 or 359 maybe, or 360. One of those two.
Yeah, it might be. I'll have a look and I keep going. Yep.
Yep. It hasn't released yet.
No.
But once it does release, Jen and Jim asked these two questions that I literally thought were for me.
Hold on. Was that when Jim asked the question about everything is perfect right now, but I still have this desire for more money, for example? Was that question?
It was, but he asked. So I actually have a number, and when
I think that's in 358 or 359. Then 359.
359. Okay, perfect.
Yeah, and it's published. Yeah, because I didn't see that live, but I started listening to it today. Yeah,
you're right. It is. So, but Jim asks a very specific, and you and I have talked. Like, I don't think $10,000. Right? I'm like, what am I going to do with 100 million? This is what I'm going to do with 100 million. This is where I'm going to place it. This is where I want to do. This is how I want to improve. And have fun and expand. And right, Jim asks that, and Jim asks that very specific question. How do I? He's like, I'm happy where I am. I'm satisfied, but I still want the $100 million. And he's like, how do I stop wanting the $100 million and just be happy with where I am? He's like, I feel like there's a balance. I need to figure that out, right? There has to be a balance between that. And then when Joshua said, he's like, well, if you got the $100 million, are you guaranteed to be happy? And Jim was like, well, you got other problems. Joshua said, well, you got to get accountants, you got to give some away, you got to get charities, you got people asking for stuff. Is there a guarantee that you will be happy for the rest of your life with $100 million? And Jim was like, no. He says, well, if you're in alignment, are you guaranteed to be happy for the rest of your life if you're in alignment for the rest of life? And the answer is yes. So Joshua just said, go into alignment, and everything else will come into place. That blew I'm like, oh my God, that was the exact question I was almost too afraid to ask. Right? It was exactly where it was. How many times have I said, you've heard me say, I get it, but I'm not being it, right? I'm not getting it. And then Jen had asked a question about geometry, which was really, really interesting. But at the very end of the question in that episode, Joshua says, well, whatever you get, whatever information I give you is dependent upon the questions you ask. You have to ask questions for me to give you information. For you to get new information, you have to ask questions.
Right. And you only ask a question when you're a vibrational match to the potential answer. And so you could hear that information randomly, but it's not going to mean anything to you. And I suppose that's why Joshua likes the question and answer format, because we have the more formal learning where they teach us things that they believe we want to know or need to know, which is what the Ascension Experience or Bootcamp is. But the question and answer format, they say all of those thoughts and answers exist in the field of potentiality. I don't know what language they use, but that's what I call it. And then when you ask a question, then that brings that information in. So it then becomes part of the human experience or the universal consciousness, whatever you want to call it. So
nobody else does that. It's a group. It's so much. It's right. What you said is beautiful. It's question and answer, and then it becomes bigger because he has a group question and answer with 50 of us on there.
Yeah.
Half of that have never. Some people it's their first time. Some people it's their 200th time. Some people have never missed a live. So you get this really unique group of people asking the simplest to the most in depth. Jen has been, she's obviously very aligned and she's very in tune, and she asks some really, really beautiful, very in-depth questions. Jim is a new guy. He asks some very, very basic. I want $100 million, but I was like, how do I not want to have that? And Jen's like, how does geometry come and play with our life? And, so here's two very different questions, but both I felt were like almost specifically given to me by the universe. And they were both huge, eye-opening, like, holy cow.
Yeah, I was listening to that just about like half an hour ago before I started talking to you, walking back up the hill with my earbuds, and I thought, this is really, really, really good. I'm going to read the next few things about intelligence. Intelligence is nothing more than interest in a specific subject. So that's interesting as well, because you were just saying that, and that's why I mentioned about dementia, that I ended up not being interested, if you like, but well, I suppose you could say I was interested. So I learned a lot about it. Anyway, intelligence is nothing more than interest in a specific subject. As you find interest, you attract intelligence. The more you focus on any subject with passion, the more knowledge naturally flows to you. As you gain confidence in your knowledge, you remove fear and doubt from the subject. The confidence that is present and the fear and doubt that are not acknowledged lead you to access higher and higher vibrational thoughts and ideas. It's as simple as that. So it's an interesting thing, because most people would say that knowledge, intelligence, and wisdom are all different.
And I would even go even further. And this is such a powerful quote, right? You talk about being unhappy at work and you wonder why mistakes happen. You talk about being unhappy at work, unsatisfied with your work. You talk about your boss on your back. I mean, just set up that vibrational match with this quote. You can't do your job well. You can't access fun, inspirational information when you're in that vibrational level of misery, of I don't want to be here, of dissatisfaction, right? I mean, it's not going to happen. So for me, it's like this quote, that this one particular was like, and you say it all the time, like reframe the way you look about how do you enjoy what you're doing. If you're not enjoying the project, put it on hold, take a deep breath, go get in the right mindset, reframe it, come back to it, and it will be a whole different, right? You have to do that.
Yeah, forcing yourself through it. I mean, that's how a lot of people do it, but that's not really a great thing. I just remembered something that is important to me, something important that I forgot to tell you. Hey, it's about me, my most important favorite subject. Well, after I had that breakthrough with Jessica, I suddenly had energy like a man possessed. And I was zinging like I'd had 20 coffees or some methamphetamine or something. Not that I ever tried that stuff, and I wouldn't, but I was just so full of energy. It was completely insane. That night, for whatever reason, I slept 2 hours, right? 2 hours. And I woke up the next day and I thought, man, I'm going to be a train wreck. And I was just still bouncing off the walls. Like, I know Joshua has said to us that energy, you might think it came from carbohydrates or whatever it might be, from your food, from, digesting food, calories, whatever. But they say really energy comes from the universe. So, it's something you allow to flow through you. And I guess that's a good example, because if you had 2 hours sleep, you wouldn't really normally be feeling mega energized. But I think it's because that realization unblocked a lot of things and allowed source energy to flow through me much, much more. And the second thing is, with this integration work we're doing, where we are endeavoring to start to live according to an intellectual idea we've absorbed, which is that we are the creator of everything in our lives. And therefore, if you're annoyed about some person, really you need to go in and examine why are they reflecting this to you, or in what way are they helping you to get to where you've asked them to help you to get to, sort of thing. So that integration part I suddenly started seeing that at a whole new level as well. I guess partly because in this exercise, I'd stopped blaming the people who I thought had betrayed me and realized, well, if I created it all, then why did I do that? And why has this person done this stuff to me, as I thought, for 30 years? why are they doing that to me for 30 years? And it's because, well, at some high level, I asked them to, and this person extraordinarily has put themselves out hugely in their life in order to give me what I thought was beef and, cut me out of their life and be horrible. And they've done all of that, which must be an incredibly hard thing to do, to play the role that, as a pre-birth intention, I asked them to play. So suddenly when I rephrased all of that and didn't blame that person anymore and owned and accepted all of that, the scales fell from my eyes. And so it's not just the high energy, which is still here, but it's also that realization at a deeper level of this integration concept that we may or may not get to talk about today. So that was the.
I do want to talk. Right. So I love that. So let's talk about what this integration really means, because it is interesting. So the way it's being described, and once again, it's the first time I'm sort of really hearing and trying to understand, is that theoretically, right? Let's just say you've created everything in your life, including this moment with me. I've created everything in this life, including this moment with you. I am responsible for everything in this moment. We're attached, we're included, we're all one. I'm seeing it from my perspective. You're seeing it from your perspective. It's still the one moment you've created and one moment I've created. We've agreed to create this moment together. Yep. Right. And if we're on a group call, there's 10 of us, we've all agreed to create this moment together for our individual highest good, whatever that, may be. We're all seeing it from our own individual perspective. Nobody's seeing it from the same perspective, yet we're all linked together and it's all one. Is that the high end of what it is? I mean,
that is definitely a very big part of it. The spiritual masters of the ages have said similar things, haven't they? And I suddenly see quotes from the Bible as, I understand the kind of deeply mystical nature of some of those statements. Like there's some quote from Jesus, which is along the lines of, whatever you do to the least of them, you do unto me. So in other words, you might kick a beggar in the street or something like that, but that's really that kind of oneness concept, isn't it? That if you do it to them, you do it to me. And I guess essentially you're doing it to yourself. If everything's an extension of you, you kick the beggar, well, you're kicking a butt of you.
Well, even more, you created that beggar at that moment to either teach you, show you, enlighten you something, like let's just say some limiting belief about yourself. And if you've processed that limiting belief, you're walking by that love, that beggar, so to speak, and you're giving them love, right? But if there's a trigger in any situation on the planet, it's almost like you've set up a minefield, right? This reality, this illusion is one gigantic minefield that you've laid all the mines out there. Everything is. And some you step on and just people pop up. And what are those people? They're going to trigger something about you, right? It's everything until you accept everything you've seen, your wife cheating on you, divorce, people embezzling all the money, putting you in bankruptcy, accusing you of false things, like anything on the freaking planet, leaving you, taking everything from you, whatever it is, getting into an accident, whatever it is that has happened to you in this reality concept is actually a message of a limiting belief for you to process. If you take that incident as a negative situation. Now, if you take it as like, oh my God, like you could, like if you were telling me I was there's a very famous segment in sports history where this guy, I think it was like, I forget his name, Chris Everett or John Everett was a quarterback for the Rams, and Jim Rome was a sports reporter. And he called the guy, like, he said like a very unflattering name, but he was basically calling him a coward and a wimp. And the guy said, call it to me again. Now, meanwhile, this is a football player, 6'5", 240 pounds. The guy's a little reporter. And he says it to him again. This football player leaps over, live on television, leaps over the interview table and starts to tackle and pound on the guy. Right? So it's like everything in life is like that for us. We create these things. If we don't take the moment and to use one of your words to reframe that situation. Okay, wait a minute. How is this for my highest good? If we don't take that moment and ask that question, well, then we're just falling into the illusion, right? And that's why those minefields keep popping up. People say, how does this always happen to me? How do I attract trouble all the time? Well, it's just obvious, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is that what you're seeing it as integration? Like I've been thinking about it a lot, and I'm not.
Well, I'll have a look at some of those bits in a minute. I just want to say another biblical quote came to me, which is "Judge not, lest ye be judged," which I always took to mean that that's for God to judge, you know, on the final day when you die, whatever, God will judge you and decide if you go upstairs or downstairs or, you know, in between. And so I always assume that it's not your role to judge, and you will be judged harshly by God for being unloving towards somebody. But another way to look at that actually is judge not lest you be judged, because if you're criticizing somebody or sending negative thoughts or vibrations to them, then you've got the wobble in your vibration. So you're instantly kind of getting the feedback at that point. So it's actually, you're doing it to yourself. Did you not realize? And Wayne Dyer has a similar thing, because Wayne Dyer says, I guess, quoting what might be a Christian concept, like, which is you won't be punished for your anger. So, you know, God might say, well, you don't want to be angry towards someone or something, but you will be punished by your anger. And I eventually understood what Wayne Dyer was getting at, which is that, well, if you're in a state of anger, you're out of alignment and your vibration is heading downstairs. So being in that state is punishment in itself, and the same with judgment. But anyway, so integration. Shall we finish off the last few intelligence quotes and then talk about integration?
Let's do it.
Okay, intelligence does not come from within your mind, which is what we all think. You do not create thoughts and ideas from within. You access the intelligence of the universe. So that's an amazing concept, isn't it? We can all access the intelligence of the universe. You were saying that just before. You have control over how much access you have at any moment in time. As you get better at accessing intelligence, you gain confidence and access becomes more. Your access to intelligence expands with confidence. So, I mean, we're going through these fast, but they're massive. We could spend time on, maybe we will another day. As fear and doubt, excuse me, enter your vibration, your confidence is diminished and you begin to limit your access to intelligence. As you limit your access at an early age, you attract labels that reinforce your inability to access intelligence. These labels are false. I'll stop halfway through that one, because you've talked about dyslexia, and there was a label, and the teachers labeled you as not being able to do stuff, right?
Well, it goes back to the system, right? It's like this educational system has these rules and has these guidelines, and if you don't specifically fit within those, you get a label.
Yeah.
Right. But if you do, you get a different type of label. And then Josh was saying, that's not how it works. Like, we're all equal. Just because you're a better swimmer and he's a better biker and he's a better runner and he's a better soccer player or football player or whatever it may be, right? You all have access to the same information.
Yeah.
You're all accessing it differently. So the question I would come is, so if you gain more access to information by developing more confidence, how do you get the base level of confidence? Is that just through alignment? Is that through just believing and trusting?
I guess by doing it, pushing past fear and doing it, really. That so I mean, in a trivial example, Jessica's going to give Trace and me some French classes, because I can speak a bit of French. I've lived in France, and we lived in France for a while, and but she's fluent in French and German and English and can speak Italian and Spanish, and she actually was like a Berlitz, which is one of the big online language schools. She was a Berlitz teacher and course creator. So anyway, so she's going to teach us French, but even though I know a bit of French and I passed exams, you know, through the Alliance Française and all that stuff, and I even did a French literature paper at university in the 1970s or something, whatever it was. And anyway, I'm apprehensive about it. I'm apprehensive that I'll make mistakes, that my accent will be terrible, that she'll speak too fast and I won't understand what she's saying and I'll feel stupid. So it's all of that stuff, right? Which is pretty ridiculous, because, you know, when you're in France and you have a couple of glasses of wine, suddenly your French gets a lot better because you relax and get over all those inhibitions. and not too much wine because then you actually forget what you're saying, but just the right amount of wine, and you're optimal because your confidence, your inhibitions start to fall away a little bit. So, I mean, it's a really funny thing because I've been talking to her about some business stuff, and I've been talking about her personal brand and creating and telling her story, and kind of creating a signature process around what she does. Because she could say, I coach people and I coach coaches, right? Which sounds good, and here's my hourly rate. But what I'm saying is, well, what you do is actually far more profound than that, and you're selling yourself short. And she is out of her comfort zone with that sort of stuff. And I think, oh, that's crazy. But then as soon as we talked about the French, I thought, oh, okay, now I see. Right. The French thing for me is like this business stuff and branding and marketing for you. So I get that. So yeah, no, did I answer your question? I'm not sure. But I know that if I start practicing the French and if I start to believe that I'm okay in it, and if I'm not, who cares, because I'm enjoying it, then, and that's probably the thing. It's like, I'm enjoying this. It's not about being the good boy. Hey, there's a good insight. Just my good boy coming in again. Anyway, these labels such as dyslexia are false. It's not that you have a fundamental incontrovertible disability. You are simply not allowing the access to intelligence to flow to you as much as it seems to flow to others. Most of the conditions that foster learning disabilities stem from a misunderstanding of how learning evolves differently for each individual. So that's a very key insight. It all starts with interest. You do not have the ability to learn something you're not ready to learn. If you have no interest in a subject, you will not learn it. You might be able to remember certain aspects of the subject as long as needed to take a test, which is Jerry in the exams, but that is not learning. Learning requires interest. Interest requires desire. Desire impacts the timing of that which is to be learned. So that's pretty interesting as well. Like Trace, I didn't know this, but I discovered last year that she's had a lifelong passion to have bees, like honeybees, be a beekeeper. And so lo and behold, this course came along, which she enrolled in, but they said, sorry, we're full. But then it all fell into place, and she's always wanted to do it, and she loves it. And so not surprisingly, on every test, she's top of the class, and it doesn't feel like work.
That's amazing. Tony Robbins, in one of his books, so, this is not new information, right? But we're seeing it in a new light. That's the big difference. He talks about, he was, when he was invited to come to Maui and talk to this kid whose parents had Tony Robbins come there because they said he couldn't learn. Every teacher has said he was stupid. He was this, he couldn't learn. He was kicked out of high school after high school. Tony Robbins spent an hour with him. And you know what he asked him? And it's an outline in his book. What do you like? He's like, I like surfing. Oh, you're in Maui. Okay, tell me about surfing. And he went into all these special details about surfing and intricate, all these different things. And then Tony started to say to him, like, well, that's kind of like math, right? Like if that and that and that kind of equals that, right? He's like, yeah. He's like, well, if you applied your surfing to math, right? And he's like, the story you just told about how you catch a wave and how it's the feeling. He's like, that's a story. That's a narrative, right? From an English paper. If you were going to talk about a paper and you were going to write like that, how would you write it? Tell me that story. And, within this kid was kicked out of school until he couldn't learn. And Tony Robbins in an hour was like, this kid's brilliant. What are you talking about? Right. Wow. So many times we're jammed into these, right? Jammed into these little, and they're very confining. They're confining systems that were designed to knock people out that were not ready to conform. People like us who were always kind of on the fringe, like, yeah, I get it, but it's just not me. Like, I get it. Like, I'm not gonna burn down the tower, right? I get what you're saying, but no thanks. I'm gonna do something a little different, right? So it's like we're on the fringe of that, and either we fit in perfectly or we didn't fit in, or it's so interesting to me to see how the universe describes intelligence, because it's not how society describes it. It's the polar opposite. That the only way you can gain it is by going to school, getting degrees, having initials after your name, and spending hours upon hours and hours. And what Joshua is saying is that get a passion, have some confidence, enjoy what you're doing, and the answers will come.
So there's two stories there. One is the story you told me recently about the guy who, is it the SAT, which is kind of like your university thing? The guy that
Trevor, the author Trevor Moad. You can look it up.
Right. So he got some phenomenal, like genius level SAT score, And then suddenly everyone treated him differently. And then he went on to fulfill the promise of a brilliant genius level SAT scorer. And then years later, 10 years later or something, when was it Princeton, we're doing a kind of an audit. They said, oh, you were one of whatever it was, 10 people that year in America whose scores were wrong. And you actually had like this ultra low SAT score. So I thought that was a fascinating thing about perception, and the belief that he was that clever person enabled him to bring in that universal intelligence and be that person. And the other examples I talked a little bit about previously was that when I was 17 and we had the final exam, which is kind of like an SAT, I guess, and I didn't go to a lot of classes. I was very rebellious, and I took a subject that I'd never done before, which was geography. And because I was a teenager, and I'd stay up late reading poetry and stuff at night, and I didn't go to class because the geography class was like 9 a.m, so I'd often sleep in and not go. And the teacher, it was a Catholic school, Catholic priest, William Blythe, Father William Blythe. He'd been a missionary in what was called the Belgian Congo. Anyway, very nice man, but he said, oh, you're wasting your time. Don't even bother to go to the exam. You don't know anything about this subject. You don't have a chance. But my friend across the road, Eddie, who was an accountant eventually, he was a very thoughtful and sort of considered guy. And he said, well, I've got previous year's exams here, and I always ask a question about this group of topics and a question about that group of topics. So in other words, there's going to be one which is about geology. And I thought, well, I'm interested in the geology of New Zealand, the rocks and earthquakes and mountains. And also there'll be one about social or economic stuff. And I studied stuff about ports and trade in Western Europe, about Rotterdam being the biggest port. And I didn't know anything about that. So I got really interested in that and I started studying it. And the reason I graduated top of the school was because I got so interested in the geography, that I got 89% of it. Just carried me right. It was like I got on top of that wave and I surfed that baby all the way to the beach. And because I was such a misfit and a rebel, my friends, when they saw my results, didn't believe it. And my girlfriend at the time, she knew I'd been at her house every night when I should have been studying for the exam. She said the computer must have made a mistake. And I just realized why. It's because I clearly had, if I was interested, I had the intelligence, but I wasn't interested. So people, I don't know if they thought I was dumb, or they might have thought, well, he's not even going to try. He might be clever if he tried. I don't know whether they thought I was bright or dumb, but I have no idea. But anyway, the point is that took my imagination and that carried me through. And that's why I graduated top of the school from being, the long-haired bum who didn't go to class.
It's so amazing, right? When you think about what we're told by, let's just say, the authority figures versus what is possible, right? And so my cousin, and this is before, this was a couple weeks ago, my cousins they were staying with us for a week. My wife was in traveling, and they have 2 little kids. And the little girl is amazing. I think she's 11. And they were doing online school. So I had gone downstairs and they were doing some schoolwork down there. And she was very, very frustrated. She couldn't get this science problem. And I was already on the idea that, hey, alignment, take a deep breath, everything already exists. You have to become a vibrational match for the answer, right? That was sort of and I had said to her, I said, and they're very religious. I said, God created you in his vision, right? And his
image.
Perfection.
Yeah, his image, I say, yeah.
She's like, yeah. I'm like, do you think God knows the answer to this? She's like, yeah. So you think he keep that from you? No. Well, how do you think you might find it? Oh, I don't know. I said, well, what is God all about? Love. Well, sit in love for a little bit. See if the answer comes. 20 minutes later, she comes down. I got it. It's there. I got it. And I just started laughing. She's from a young kid's perspective. She's like, I never thought about it that way. If I don't know it, I have to sit there in love and it'll come to me.
Wow.
I'm like,
wow.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. Right. But
this is the greatest gift that anybody ever gave a child. What an extraordinary thing. What a wonderful gift.
But could you imagine if we were told that? Like,
I know. No, but we had to tread a difficult path to get to where we are at the top of this mountain that we've been reading about this week.
Well,
But
we were
that's
given
extraordinary.
these.
But, like Joshua says, the children arrive at a higher vibration. The earth is at a higher vibration and they come in at a match to that. So they don't have to do the hard yards that we did because they arrive standing on our shoulders, so to speak, or above. And so,
Right.
probably, who knows, we may have never been ready to absorb that message that she adopted instantly and used, and now has an incredible lifelong tool, knowing that the universe will give her an answer if she poses a question, the right question, in the right way, from love and not fear.
Right.
Wow.
Well, I think, and Joshua took it to the next level with the quotes you just went through, right? They're really powerful, and enlightening. What I realized that what we were going through is in life, the only way, I shouldn't say the only way, an incredible way people learn is through experience, right? There are people that just can read and understand and watch it, boom. But you have to, the more you experience, the more you learn. We've experienced these unique situations so that we can explain it back to people, because even when we're on these calls and there are people that don't have kids, and you've said to me numerous times, you don't have a kid, right? The concepts, you don't have to have a kid to develop the concept. Like you get it, right?
No.
But we all feel, because, I don't have a kid. I didn't do this. So I should, like, well, no, you do. You have a full, like Jessica's giving me parenting advice. She never had any kids, right? On the call today, right?
That was good. I heard that today. That was a whole other story.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
But it was good advice. It was good. You didn't have to have kids.
It was very good advice. Yeah. But it was from a different place. In a world of no coincidences, at the beginning of this relationships with children, my 32-year-old niece came to stay, one of my sister's daughters, and then my 27-year-old step-grandson came to stay straight after. So, and I've known him both of them since the day they were born. And so I thought that's pretty interesting. So I could practice all my kid exercises with these, younger adults, which is pretty cool. And talking about learning, my first wife was a very, very clever, academically clever person, brilliant mind, and she had kind of almost a photographic memory, really. And I think she became an academic PhD and all that stuff, and she was straight A student, blah blah blah. And she knows from when we were younger that her public exam scores in math and physics, for example, were always way ahead of mine, because I was really not that interested. But sometimes I'd explain concepts to her from physics, right? And she'd look at me and say, how do you know that? Because in her mind, she's thinking, you got 60 in that exam and I got 85 or something. How the hell could you know that? Like, that doesn't make any sense. And I said, well, because I sat there in physics class and listened to the teacher, and I thought, he's given us a concept. So I thought, well, how does that play out in reality? Like, let me think of an example of that thing. So what I did with physics was the same as what you were saying, see, which is earlier, is that it made sense to me when I thought, how does that play out in the physical world? Like, here's an example of this thing happens. And then so I locked in that process. And in a way, what I got from physics was far more valuable than what she got. She got a meal ticket and a profession, whereas I got an understanding of the physical universe. And I'm fascinated to this day by people like Galileo in particular, and his examinations of the universe and physical motion and matter and all that stuff. Physical motion, not matter, motion of objects and all that sort of stuff. So so in other words, that got my interest, so that's why I understood it so deeply. And in that regard, my understanding of physics was potentially more intelligent than hers.
Yeah, well, it's funny because you and I tend to think similar and like that. And you said something that was really, again, just like very enlightening for me at the moment. It's people understanding it from a theoretical or going from a practical. If you just ask that question, there are people that are here to explore and experience the theoretical side of things. And there are people like you and I that want to understand the practical side. This is super cool. So when it comes to even learning this Joshua stuff, like, I get it. It's super cool. How do I be it? Like, right now, I want to be it right now. Tell me right now how to be it, right? Because it's all about how do I use it, right? I love the information. When the theoretical side, they're not so worried about how to use it. They get it. They understand it. And they're like, oh, I understand it. That's it. And I'm always like, okay, I understand it. Now, how do I become it?
Yeah. Yeah. So there's a fine line between applying it in your life, which is obviously desirable, and what I've noticed some people do. They're impatient, the form needs to be longer, and I've read this stuff, but I'm not getting it. And that's actually because they're trying to use the material to control conditions because they think they'll suddenly be happier and feel better. But it's like, no, it works the other way. You start off by feeling happy and feeling better, and then everything you want will flow to you. You're trying to control conditions, which is the opposite. I'll see what I can find about integration before we wrap up, shall I?
Yeah, I would love that.
Yeah. So one thing they said, which is really interesting, is what you fear is that which you must face. Once it's been faced in courage, it will become obvious there was never anything to fear. Well, that's true, because when the worst things happen, they're never normally as bad as you thought they were, mostly anyway. So to be the creator of your reality, you must begin the process of integration. Integration is the act of seeing all parts of you and your outer reality as the whole of you, which is a pretty big kind of mystical, spiritual, theoretical construct, isn't it? It's the act of seeing all parts of you and your outer reality as the whole of you. In fear, you separate yourself from your inner and outer realities. In love, you integrate every aspect of your outer and inner realities in one unified whole. It is the whole of you. And then they say how you do it. You integrate all of you through absolute unconditional acceptance. This is what love is. Because I've often thought, right from the beginning, Joshu talks about love, and everyone thinks they understand love. So nobody ever asks, well, what do you mean by love, Joshua? And so that is a question I have often thought of asking and never did for whatever reason. Maybe a good boy wouldn't ask such a question because it's a bit.
It's a great question. You should ask that tomorrow on his Joshua Live. I love that. That's such a profound question. It really is.
Yeah. Well, because love, and from what Joshua means, is not what we think it is, right? So they're saying you integrate all of you through absolute unconditional acceptance. This is what love is. Which is quite funny because not that long ago, Trace and I were on a road trip, and we started doing, I started with a Spotify playlist, and then she grabbed my phone and we started going through all these old songs. And I was telling Jackie, who besides being an actor and podcaster is a singer, Jackie Seiden with the Evolution Podclub. And I said to her, we were doing a road trip the other day, and the song came on and it made me think of the Joshua stuff. I think it's Foreigners, I Want to Know What Love Is. And I thought, and this song stuck in my mind for a long time. So I was laughing about that with Jackie. She's like, yeah. And, she's sort of on the camera. So she starts singing it and boogieing along to it. And I thought, yeah, and that's why the song came to me and why it stuck us. And that's the first time I thought, I'd really like to ask Joshua, I want to know what love is. Tell me, Joshua. But anyway, here we go. This is what love is. It's integrating through absolute unconditional acceptance. We don't want to be a foreigner to love. That's corny, I know, but there we go.
Oh my God, I love it. That's brilliant.
That's really corny. And then we get into the inner child stuff, and then the inflection point in the mountaintop. So, which was all quite biblical language too, wasn't it? About into the valley of this, and not the valley of fear and death, but into the valley of love, descend the mountain. Yeah,
it is. It does lead you to look for a biblical connection. And I don't mean to look to stretch. I meant to look, because we've been brought up as Christians, you and I both, right? Catholics, and with certain phrases and certain psalms and songs and understandings and books, and the way they speak, there is a direct connection. It's like it's like this was downloaded, 2,000 years ago, 3,000 years ago to people, and they interpreted it one way, and now the download's coming again, and we're interpreting it a different way.
Yeah, well, I've always had a sense that there is a kind of a mystical or deeply spiritual aspect to Catholicism, besides the rituals and the things that people know about. And that was the part that always resonated with me, that I was always fascinated by. And in the last year or so, I've become quite intrigued about that. And one of the reasons is my uncle, who passed away a few years ago, he was deeply Catholic, devoutly Catholic, and he even got a papal knighthood. And he got a similar thing from the Queen of England too. He was a brilliant mathematician and a kind of a Cold War spy and an astronomer, and deeply, deeply religious man, but a deeply, deeply spiritual man and a devout Catholic. And he experienced God and his belief in a very present way. And in a way, he lived his life according to the ideas that you and I are endeavoring to adopt now, that he did everything from a place of love, and things just came to him, and he had the most extraordinary life. And so that interested me. And so what happened was that I, in a world of no coincidences, I befriended the local Catholic priest in this little village. And it got me thinking more and more about Catholicism. And I haven't told him this, but I'm not planning to go back and be a devout Catholic and go to church every Sunday and confession and communion and all that stuff. Although I would be tempted to go to confession and have the communion experience, because it's such a divine and sacred ritual in Catholicism. I'm sure I can, channel universal source energy and have an ecstatic experience around it. So I may do that. But anyway, I'm not going to go to confession to him, because I wouldn't like him to know who I really am. So I'll go to some guy in town I don't know. Anyway, so he gave me a book, which is Rediscover Catholicism. And I started looking at it. And so and at the time I was thinking a lot about being authentic. And this book actually gets into that spiritual or mystical side of Catholicism. And then part 2, the authentic life. What is the authentic life? Blah, blah, blah. So, and it's like, oh my goodness, it's all about this. And then what sets them apart? Attraction and influence. So it's like, well, this is interesting, because I didn't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater with Catholicism. I stopped going to church when I was 18. My mother didn't speak to me for a week, and I'm sure you can understand that coming from an Italian Catholic family yourself. So, but it's like, yeah, that stuff is there, and it actually did shape. It got my interest in spirituality at a very young age, and I think it connected me to and made me ready for the stuff that would come after. You know what I'm saying? As to why.
Absolutely.
Do you understand why I'm saying what I'm getting at as to why it's important to me, even though I'm not planning to, go back and be a regular churchgoer or anything. It's a part of my journey, which I'm now understanding and appreciating, and I want to explore, because there's probably more richness there.
Well, I think we experienced it in a very segregated way, right?
Yeah.
If you look at the original, right? I mean, how many times has the Bible been interpreted? 1,000, 10,000, right? It was first told, stories told hand in hand, right? So what was shared with us is a very, it's a curated aspect of what was really delivered. To go back and understand how that curated element relates to what we're learning now is wildly interesting to me as well. Like, that's cool. Like, wow. Like, because you start thinking about this information has been passed down for tens of thousands of years, right? This has been around, but it's been in so many different forms, and it's never been able to be, once again, it goes to theoretical back to practical. It's never been able to be put in practical use in a scalable way. I think right now, if you look at even some of the authors, right, from hundreds or thousands of years ago, right? Jen brought up the book Euclid, right? You look up all these different books, they were individuals. What Joshua is trying to do now, he's trying to scale it. He's trying to get 150 people all at the same time to come to a realization that they are the creator, they are source themselves, they are the creator, and everything that they're experiencing, they've created for their highest good. Now, come into alignment, accept everything as perfect, see the world as love. You can make a difference. That simple, that fast. How can I get as many people as possible thinking that way and not asking anything else from them? Like, there's no cult leadership here. You're not paying into some.
In fact, it's anti-cult really, because Joshua says, once you know how to listen to your inner voice, you won't need me anymore or us anymore. Yeah.
Right.
So you used the word curate or curated twice or three times just then, which is kind of interesting, because the Latin word for a priest, like a Catholic priest, is C-U-R-A-T. I think there's no E on the end. So, and I know that a local priest was often called a curate, C-U-R-A-T-E, when I was a kid. I know that word from, my Catholic youth, but the priest in his house here in Akaroa, he's got a thing, and it's got that word C-U-R-A-T, and it's Latin. The plaque says a priest lives here. And so I said, what is that word? He said, it's Latin for a priest.
Wow. And you know what?
It was a slightly different word, but I'm interested in etymology, word origins. I'm also
Yes,
interested in
Jen.
similar thing, entomology, which is insects, but I'm more interested in etymology than entomology. So I'm quite interested in word origins. I'm a bit of a wordy.
I like you and Jen, right? Have those conversations on the origin of the words. I like that. When you
Yeah,
guys have those, I
yeah.
like it.
So
That is super interesting.
she was having this whole geometry experience about inflection points and everything, and then she said something like, "Oh, the hospital I was born in was like in Euclid Street or Euclid Avenue or Drive or something, Euclid, and all the Euclidean geometry and everything." Oh, that's pretty interesting.
I just went and downloaded the book. Like as soon as she said that, I'm like, I'm going to download that book.
What is the book?
It was called Euclid's Elements.
Oh, right.
Right. And then I guess it was written, whatever it's a Greek, right? Whatever, it's thousands of years old.
Yeah.
And it's the second most whatever read or influential book next to the Bible. I don't know. I'm quoting anecdotal. I have not read that anywhere, but I think she said that.
Wow.
In her.
Wow.
So I'm like, boom, I downloaded that thing. And I'm like, I'm reading that.
Yeah.
But like I said, like I don't, right. So here's where you talk about influence in the world, right? I started doing Audible when it started. I don't know, was it 5 years ago, right? Whenever I started doing Audible. And since then, I pretty much do 50 to 100 books a year. There's no question. It's just, you just pump them out, and, do I get people like, oh, you don't really, then I get people telling me, yeah, well, you're not reading, you're not really learning. And I said, I could play video games. I could, watch TV. I'm listening to a book. I could listen to music. Like are you telling me if you don't listen to music, you don't feel better? Like, okay. Like, I don't know what to say. Like, it's so funny. Once again, it's a system that if you don't fit within that system.
Yeah.
So Bill Gates says, think about this. I've read more books in the last 5 years than Bill Gates and Warren Buffett combined. Think about that for a second.
Wow.
Right. Yeah. Cause I'm close to like 500 books in 2 years, right?
Wow.
Just the last 2 years.
Yeah.
Audible, I do 1.5 times
Audible
speed.
makes things very accessible, doesn't it?
It really does. But think about what we talk about in the society about, oh, Bill Gates is the smartest man, Warren Buffett. They read a book a week. I can go. I took a trip the other day. I was driving. It was a 3-hour. I finished the book one day. I don't know. Like, okay, right. Listen to 1.5 times. But I found it fascinating. I found, there are different ways to learn. There are different ways to experience information. Right.
Yeah.
And yes, I just have a tough time with ADHD and dyslexia, sitting down and reading. I would rather, to be honest, I do much better if I'm going for a run or I'm exercising or I'm in the steam room. Literally, I go for a drive. I'd rather listen to a book than music or anything.
Yeah.
I love it. I literally can't consume enough.
Yeah. It's an incredible way to experience new ideas. And for me, I guess one of the ways I got into what you might call modern spirituality back in the 90s, it was called New Age, was reading books. In those days, they were mostly paper books. And I read Wayne Dyer and John Keogh and went from there, Deepak Chopra. And then I discovered one day in a bookshop called Pathfinder, which doesn't exist anymore because everything's online. I discovered a Seth book and I thought, this looks interesting. I wonder what this is. And that just opened my mind completely when I started reading the Seth books. Yeah.
So here's an interesting thought. And I want your thought on this as a closing argument, as a closing discussion. So I've been through all of these different sort of, let's just say they're either mentors or teachers. Oh, thanks, babe. Diet Coke. All right. And I've been through all these. So now, because I really enjoy what Gary and Joshua and what we're doing, there's so much new stuff. It's not like you're repeating old things over and over and over again, right? I mean, I love Tony Robbins. I would never knock him. But you could do the Date with Destiny 100 times. It's the same thing, although you sort of feel a little differently each time. It's like when you do the boot camp, right?
Sure.
So my question is, I started to slow down reading these new authors, just because I almost said to myself, I don't want to be confused. And I said to myself, why would I think I would get confused? And and I went back to a limiting belief of like, okay, that you got one sort of pedestal to follow. Like, you can't follow 50. You got to follow one. And I saw myself jump from like Dr. Joe Dispenza, Tom Bilyeu, Dean Grazioso, Tony Robbins, Dr. Sue Mortimer, all these people. I jumped to get to Joshua. And I'm like, I don't want to leave. So
Yeah.
I'm almost afraid to read. So it's a limiting belief. And I'm like going like, wow, how interesting is this? That learning is now a limiting belief. Right?
Yeah. Hey, look, I'm running out of limiting beliefs. Let's see what I can concoct. I need to make up some new ones. That is very interesting, isn't it? I mean, I had similar thoughts in a way because I really like the stuff I'm learning, and it's really practical, and it's relevant, and it's implementable, and it makes a mess. Like, I'm actually a completely different person from who I was when I started this journey, reading the Joshua material and joining the boot camp and all the rest of it. And so it's been the most practical and implementable and changing work I've ever done. And then I think, I'm not really absorbing any other spiritual type material, but then I think, I don't really want to, because this is the real oil, so I don't need to. And then I talked to Jessica, and then I discovered that she had been studying the Seth material since she was maybe a teenager, right? And so she's like, oh, it's wonderful that you're into Seth. Let's talk about Seth. So she got me kind of back into it, and I had downloaded some audibles of the Seth books, which is really cool. And then I studied one of Carlos Castaneda's books, which was his PhD thesis, The Teachings of Don Juan, as an anthropology text, Anthropology 101, back in 1976, because he was an anthropologist, even though it was, kind of a spiritual book. But then I discovered Jessica had been a direct student of Carlos Castaneda, so we started talking about that. So I've got some of his books about conscious dreaming and some other things, and some of the Seth books. So I am listening to some of that other stuff.
Right. But
and
she's jumped, right? So she's jumped to jump to jump to.
Is it going to take me off the path I'm on, and is it going to have conflicting information? So I did have some fear around that, which, they're just different paths to the same universal knowledge, really, aren't they?
So so this to me is a huge point, right? Because you and I are, if Joshua is using us to scale his idea, his concept, his information, whatever you want to call it, right? The ideas on life that we are all source, right? Then if we get off track, right? Because Seth talks about this, and I forget, in Seth Speaks, where Paul, right, in one of the disciples, he didn't finish his mission. He got off track. He's going to be back in 70 years, or whatever the thing there was. I don't know, remember what the exact quote was, but he's going to be back because he's got to finish. And I'm like, all right, I really like the person I'm becoming with Joshua. I feel better. I love life with what I'm learning from Joshua, right? I'm happier. I'm less stressed. I'm like, okay, I don't want to lose it. So that's a fear. Boom. So you categorize that as a fear. So I went, yesterday, it was so funny. So the book that I downloaded, because I said to myself, I can't do this anymore. And I'm going to send you the book because you're going to love it. It's called Reality Transurfing, Steps 1 through 4. And it's Joshua's teachings, but explained a whole different way with different analogies, and limiting. It's limited. It's not as expansive, right? The way Joshua. And what I'm finding now, going into it with an open mind, I am going to continue Joshua's teachings. I'm going to continue my self journey through expansion, through love, right? And through acceptance. What else is out there that can enhance my journey, right? And that's sort of, but I literally didn't read a book for like 2 months. I was like, okay, I'm going to stop with Audible. I need to stop this. I need to focus.
Yep. Yeah.
Right? We're told that, and you don't have to do that, right? You don't have to, but
that's true. And we don't want to sound like brainwashed idiots, that this is the only thing we believe in.
Well, it's when you find something you like, it's no different. When you find a friend, right, that has a political belief, you don't want to go against them, right? It's no different than what we do in anything in life. You find someone that makes sense to you, right?
Yeah.
It likes the same football team, right? Whatever, it has the same rugby conversation, likes the same golfer. You're like, okay, we can talk about this, right? And you feel like you're accepted and it's better. And then, if you go off on your own, and Joshua's got this community, he built this community. None of these other books, right? They have Facebook groups, right? They have Instagram groups, but the Joshua community that Gary has built is special and unique. It is
an unusual thing, isn't it? It is a very unusual thing because there's no rules and there's no regulations, and anyone can take a course and join. And there's a core of people who've been there a long time. Some people come and leave, and some come back and some don't. But the community does have a life of its own, and they do talk about the power of the numbers, that having a bunch of people doing this work makes a huge difference. It's a very interesting phenomenon, and sometimes I think, am I deluding myself, with all this stuff, and who the hell do I think I am, being at the leading edge of thought or something? And then it's like, but it is so obvious and so workable and so practical, and so many people who find that stuff. Like I gave Joshua's first book to one of my stepdaughters, and she's like, I love this book, I'm recommending it to everybody I know, it's incredible. And so it's because it's so compellingly obvious and so implementable, and it's instant steps to a happier you from day one.
So it's interesting. So I did that talk with my daughter's school this week.
Yeah.
The follow-up I wanted to get your thoughts. So here's a bunch of college age, 18 to 21-year-old young women. Some are graduating, entering the workforce, some are in graduate programs, across all the types of university work you could be looking for. And I thought it would be interesting to have, and I wanted your feedback, to have them, like maybe 5 or 6 of them. I may reach out to Jackie and say, hey, do you want to talk to these girls on your podcast?
Yeah, that would be very cool. Yeah. And
like I would love
host and interviewer too, Jackie. And she's got such incredible energy, and she's magnetic. The girls will love her.
Right. And the other one was like, because my daughter is infatuated with Gary and Joshua, like, because he changed her life, right, with a simple 30-minute call. I think whoever was on that call was alive. It's on one of the Joshua lives. I forget which one. But she's like, Dad, can we get like 20 girls from the sorority? And and I'm like, I think that would be so interesting to have that youth perspective. What questions would they ask? And you go back to the Joshua live, right, 359, where Joshua comes out and says, you got to ask great questions for me to ask great questions, ask anything. So the question you have, like, what it really is love, like, we got to ask those questions to get that information.
Well, the thing about Jackie is that she can answer those questions of herself. She has that knowledge and wisdom. I don't know where she got it from, but she has it. But she also channels. And when you're listening to her, I'm thinking, oh, you're actually channeling right now. It's not just you talking. And she seamlessly moves from Jackie to channeling Jackie, doesn't she? That's the Evolution Podclub. It's a great listen. It's a great listen.
Hey, Evolution Podclub. I would recommend just pick any episode from the Evolution Podcast. My favorite, I think, is the January 14th is a recent one. I think it's your beliefs matter or something like that, January 14th. But
it's not the one about meditation.
It's one of those two. There's a January 8th and a January 14th. She doesn't use numbers like Joshua does.
No, she uses dates.
Gary. Yeah, she uses dates.
Yeah.
So and she does go like, she'll say, I think to we think, and when she goes to we think, she's channeling. Right. So you kind of hear her say that, to your point.
Is it the one that's called Thinking is Not Productive, Receiving Is?
Yes.
Right. January 14. Yeah.
Brilliant.
2020. Yeah.
What I love about Jackie is she gives personal experiences where she's in and out of alignment that are relevant to all of our lives.
Yeah.
And we see that. And I always say to her, I'll text her or say, I'm jealous. I heard you. I'm jealous. You're so in alignment. I'm so grateful that you're there. And I'm so jealous, right? She starts laughing. She's like, oh no, you don't know. And I just start laughing. I'm like, okay, what led up to that, right? But those kind of stories makes us all believe we can all get there. Like we can. Yeah,
it would be really good to if she had, because she has a panel of the Evolution Podclub ladies or whatever she calls it. But if she had some of those younger women, and I know that a lot of her listenership does tend to be women between kind of 18 and 45, and then there's people like you and me who don't fit that demographic. But so in other words, I think younger women would find her very relatable. I mean, she's a lot younger than I am anyway. And I think also being an actor and a singer, I think you can't be successful as an actor or singer unless people really like you, are drawn to you, whether it's charisma or magnetism or whatever you want to call it. In other words, she has an ability to reach people and to make an impact on people, which is why she does that professionally, So she has that enormous advantage I think, that she has that skill or charisma or whatever, and she's super high energy, and which is very infectious. Like it's a buzz to hang out with her.
And she's been doing it. It's so funny because she had then I had I think you were on the email too. I had said, what book, and what book resonated with my daughter and her sorority. I sent the sorority like, I don't know, 24 Gabby Bernstein, the Universe Has Your Back, which all the girls loved, and it's really it's a short, easy to read. And then Jackie was like, "Oh my God, she was my roommate in New York. Gabby and I are best friends." And I just started laughing.
That. Yeah, I saw that. It was extraordinary. Yeah, amazing.
I'm like, "Oh my gosh!" And then another woman who created Ziva meditation was Jen's best friend.
Yeah,
and she's also on one of my mentors. Like, she's just.
I read that, and I was shaking my head, thinking, "Is this for real? This is just in a world of no coincidences. This is too much of a coincidence."
It's a small. Well, what's funny? It's that small. It's that small. Her name is Emily. I think it's Emily Fletcher. She created Ziva meditation. She went and studied meditation in India for like 2 years, and it's a beautiful. It's really It's a beautiful, simple process. She just teaches. She has a yoga studio in New York. She teaches people how to meditate, and she's got an app which you can do it, the whole 9 yards.
Right.
So I kind of wanted to take. So here's a group. We talk about Joshua. So you ask, it was about 120 girls total. I thought it was 80. My daughter was like, "There's 120 kids there." Like, okay. I spoke for 22 minutes, kept it simple. It was at the end of their chapter meeting. It's a sorority, where everybody's supposed to go and hear what the up and coming semester is going to be like, right? And my daughter said, "Dad, they have guest speakers all the time, and like the people don't shut up." She's like, "They're all talking, like nobody spoke when you spoke." Like even the woman was like, and by the way, afterwards, some people wanted to come up and take pictures with them. I'm like, this is kind of silly, right? I'm like, whoa. So I'm just a dad,
yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And but what I said was they wanted to hear what I had to say. How do we continue to grow the connection without me coming back to do a second talk on topic X, right?
And I think something like Jackie interviewing a small number of them, or vice versa, whatever, on the panel, that would be very cool. Like a young woman's spiritual exploration or journey or whatever, or getting underway with this stuff, and then and be interesting to explore, understand more about the ways in which younger people have that higher vibration. That they see things we don't, and that sort of thing. Yeah, but I mean, the podcast, the Joshua Live podcast, may or may not appeal to them, but Jackie's podcast might appeal more. Who knows? Because it's a much older demographic with the Joshua podcast, right?
Right, but that's the whole thing. It's like, is like when I hear like new people come and ask questions that I thought I already knew the answer to, I'm like, that's a silly question. And then Joshua answers, and I'm like, boom, my mind. I'm like, oh my God.
Yeah. So like, there is. That's right. I mean, Rachna would be the classic example that she asks questions about her tomatoes and about a wardrobe or cupboard door or something, closet. And then there was the latest one about her lawn, because the raccoons
the squirrels, the raccoons, they're
digging a lawn. And I hear the question, I think, oh my God, what? And then suddenly Joshua's like turned it into this most astounding insight into things that everyone can relate to. And it's like, and Joshua says, "I'm so glad you asked that question." And it's like, yeah. So I don't need to be closed-minded to people's questions. And I don't actually know what the answer is to what information you provide them. But I guess from the other point of view, if they're interested, they will be led. And is it a Buddhist saying that when the student is ready, the teacher will appear?
That's well said. And the thing that was interesting to me is that we're all asking questions on all of these Joshua Lives, right? On even the ones with Jackie, they're all a post getting a job, post adulthood questions. Nobody's asking, how do I deal with the bully in my 4th grade class? I'm being facetious at the moment, right?
Yeah.
How do I deal with failing out of high school? These are questions like you would tell, like we would look back and even say to people like, don't worry.
Yeah.
Like really?
Yeah.
Like that's not, you don't ever have to.
When I said that the Joshua community is an older demographic, and on those Joshua Lives, it's mostly older people, it doesn't have to be that way. It's just that most of the people are older, And it would be amazing to have some young people who have done the boot camp or the Ascension experience to be able to come in. But yeah, I think it's a great idea to connect them with Jackie. Yeah.
Yeah,
We
the
should
boot camp
probably
is.
wind this up shortly, shall we? It's
Oh my
90
God,
minutes.
yes,
Yeah.
we were going flying. But even the boot camp, the initial one, right? It's a you got to be in this work and want to be doing it to be able to for it to matter, right? For it to make a difference,
Yeah.
right?
Well,
And
that's
all that
true.
stuff.
Yeah. Like it does need, people do need to want to be there for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, but you're right. This is 90 minutes. This was great, Rob. And like I said, I'd probably talk to you for 10 hours and it would feel like 2 minutes.